Welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, I really wanted to dive into macros and giving you kind of like a one-on-one course. I'm going to be putting on my coaching hat here and really diving into how to implement them, how to be focusing on them, and getting clear around your macros and what to be doing next, because I think that this is an area that has a lot of confusion. And one of the biggest complaints that I hear from women is that they're eating really healthy and they're not seeing the results they want and they don't really know what to do next. And I think that macros can be a great tool to really help you understand your nutrition and understand what is happening behind the scenes first, even if you don't carry on with it for a really long period of time. It gives you the guidelines to really focus on. It gives you an understanding and the data so you can look at it and be very analytical versus guessing. The problem that I see the most is that you, yes, are eating very clean. You might be eating whole food based. You might be focusing on all the right things that are going to help with inflammation and whatnot. But do the calories add up to the goal that you're trying to achieve? And are they aligned with the bigger goal that you want? Because they can really add up over time. So for example, let's say you have a handful of almonds, not even thinking about it, it can be adding up to 400 calories really easily when you think maybe you're eating 100 and 120 or 150 calories. So you have to be really mindful of these things, because foods that are healthy don't necessarily mean that they're macro friendly or that they're going to be aligned to your bigger goal. And there's still a portion aspect that you need to keep in mind. The reason that I love macronutrients so much is because it really gives you an understanding. And more times than not, even though people feel like it can be really restrictive or it can be overwhelming, macros can give people a lot of freedom, especially when they're aligned and they're clear. I've had a lot of clients come to me, tell me they're worried about tracking macronutrients, or they feel like it'll be too restrictive and it's going to mess with their eating. But in reality, it's given them freedom because now they know how they can plan fun meals in, and it's getting rid of like the guessing of, am I doing the right things? Am I focused on the right nutrition? Or am I all over the place? Because that lack of clarity can really mess with what to do next. And it can be really overwhelming if you already feel like you're not seeing results and you don't know what to do from here. So I want to just give you the framework of what to be doing and how to track macros successfully so that you have the tool that you can use to at least analyze the data and see where you're at and understand a little bit more behind the scenes of your nutrition, even if you don't just carry it forward. Or maybe this is just something fun that you've been wanting to learn, or maybe this is something that you've been wanting to get a little bit better at. So I hope to kind of provide all those things for you in this episode. Now, like I mentioned, one of the biggest things is not having your nutrition aligned to the bigger goal. If you want to lose weight, you've probably heard it before, you need to be in a deficit. If you want to build muscle mass, you need to be in a surplus, eating at maintenance, or at least having the structure of your nutrition broken down to those bigger goals. When we say that you want to be eating in a surplus, basically what that means is your body is not going to build muscle mass when it is in a deficit, especially if it's not strategic, if you're not eating enough protein and you're not eating enough calories in general, because your body has no reason to grow muscle mass. Muscle is actually an energy source for our body when we don't have other energy that we're consuming. And with the energy that you consume through food, your body is using. One of the biggest mindset shifts that I always tell my clients is you need to trust that your body is always working with you and that your body is designed to help you reach your bigger goals. And what happens generally when we aren't reaching our goals, when we're gaining weight, or when we're not losing weight like we want to, it really comes down to habits around nutrition, not nutrition itself, or not necessarily foods themselves. Each food is going to have a makeup that's going to add up in certain macronutrients and certain calories, and that's where the energy source comes from. And that's what basically your body is interpreting it as. When that happens, it breaks it down in a certain way, but it also adds up to calories in a certain way. So what I mean by that is protein and carbs are both 4 calories per gram, and then fat is 9 calories per gram. So fat technically makes up more calories per gram, and that's why if you're eating more of this, your calories can add up really quickly. So it's important you have a good balance of that and you're not overindulging in certain areas, because it's not necessarily that 1 calorie or 1 macronutrient is worse than another, or one coming from a specific food is bad, but it matters that the breakdown and that the nutrition that you're focusing on is going to help you towards that bigger goal. Are you in a deficit? Are you eating enough protein? And do you have a good structure with your nutrition that's helping you reach that bigger goal, so that you know that your nutrition is helping align that? And I promise you, once you have that bigger understanding around nutrition and macros, it kind of helps you see it as structure, not necessarily rules and restriction. I'm going to walk you through just kind of like the simple version of macros so you can understand a little bit about how to actually apply them, what they mean, and why they're important, whether you're tracking or not. And like I mentioned, just because you're eating healthy right now doesn't mean that you're necessarily aligned to that bigger goal of yours. So if you're eating really healthy right now, but you are trying to lose weight, if you're not in a deficit, you're not going to lose weight regardless of how healthy you eat or regardless of how many salads you have. The crazy thing is if you actually go to a restaurant and you look at a lot of the ingredients, if they have their macronutrients or their calories listed on their menu, there's oftentimes a lot more calories inside of things like salads than there are maybe like a burger. And the reason for that is because of the dressing or or the amount that you get or the add-ons that you get that you just don't think about. And a lot of people just associate salad with something healthy. And just because you're associating salad with something healthy doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to get you to your bigger goal just because it's healthy. It's not necessarily a bad food, but it's important to understand that because you could be trying to lose weight and maintain muscle mass, and potentially the burger would have been a better choice because it had more protein in it. It was lower fat and lower calories than the salad that didn't have any protein. It was dressed with nuts and seeds and lots of oils and fats that really added up calorie wise. So it's really just kind of important to understand the concept of that in the makeup of food and understanding macros to the basic level so you can see which foods are going to support your goals and not necessarily just the healthy component of them. And a little caveat I'll just say in the beginning, because I do think this is really important. I think that eating whole foods, I think eating balanced foods and nutrient dense foods is very important. And I would never steer you towards eating processed foods or overly processed foods in the sake of having more food for macronutrient level or to balance macros out. I think that it's so much more important that you get your nutrition from whole foods, but there's ways to do so. And macronutrients kind of just gives you that data and gives you that analysis so you know what the breakdown of your food is. And it's not necessarily like eat processed foods and track macronutrients and eat macro friendly, because sometimes macro friendly can be really pushing you towards the processed route. And I don't think that that is a good mix either. I think there is a good balance of the two, of if you're tracking and eating whole foods and just understanding the makeup of your diet. A lot of times, especially when I'm seeing people eat really healthy, I also see that their protein is down and that it's not always going to be aligned to that bigger goal. Protein is one of the most essential macronutrients that you're focusing on because it is the makeup of what helps you build muscle mass and maintain muscle mass. When I see a lot of women struggling with putting on mass, building muscle mass, getting that lean tone figure or losing weight, first thing I want to look at is your protein. And the reason for that is because muscle is an energy source for your body. If you're not consuming enough calories, if you're not consuming enough protein, and if you're not consuming enough carbs, your body's going to go find that energy source from somewhere else. And a really easy place for it to do that is through muscle mass. And there's a whole entire process of this. I'm not going to get too scientific for you, but a process where your body actually pulls energy from your muscle mass. And now you're no longer maintaining the mass that you built, which, just so you understand, muscle takes a really long time to build. So we really don't want to take from that. We want to make sure we're maintaining the mass we've already built and also kind of achieving our bigger goals, whether that is a deficit and losing weight, but trying to maintain as much of that mass as you possibly can. Portion sizes are also a really big factor that you need to understand, because it's not necessarily that one food is bad or there's a food group you shouldn't be eating, but you should understand the portions of which are going to help you support your goals and the portion of which is going to help you kind of hit those ranges, because it really does matter. When I said earlier, if you're eating healthy, that's still great, but if your portions are off or if you don't have a good understanding of how to kind of balance those things out, it's really easy to overindulge, and it's really easy for those to add up really quickly and then to kind of get outside of the ranges that you should be in, and why you're potentially not seeing results right now, especially if you're over protein, over fats, or anything like that. If you're not paying attention to your portions, it's really easy to kind of get there. And that's one of the biggest things you should understand, regardless if you're macro tracking or not, is what do your portions come out to be? And are they satisfying you? Are they balanced in terms of your meal so that you can stay fuller longer? And are they a true portion size, or are they more mindless eating and craving related? And we're going to be diving into these a little bit more, but I really want to just give an overview of the areas that I see a lot of people struggling in when it comes to macronutrients and why we want to look at these different components, because there's also two other components when it comes to macro tracking where people get really overwhelmed and why it's kind of a turnoff to them. First being that your meals switch daily and you feel overwhelmed by the post-tracking action, where you're trying to figure out what you ate, how much you ate, and you're doing more of a guesstimation than a true calculation, which causes it to, one, have your totals really off, but also feel like it's something that's too much work and you're constantly updating. And this is something that we're going to be talking about a little bit later and how to actually fix that problem. And the other is not knowing what to be eating and feeling overwhelmed with trying to find macro-friendly recipes or trying to find recipes that are going to work with your macro, building out casseroles and trying to kind of divide them up, and all of the guesstimation that goes into that, and trying to get clear on what to be eating and what to be focusing on versus feeling so overwhelmed with it. So those are the two areas that I see people struggle the most when it comes to macros and potentially what turns them off from it. So I want to give you some ways to kind of work through those as well. So let me just give you a simple explanation of macronutrients and just kind of an overview of each one. There's 3 different macronutrients: protein, carbs, and fats. Protein is going to help you build muscle mass. It's going to control your hunger and stay satiated throughout the day. It's also going to be one of the biggest building blocks in terms of your hair, your skin, your nails. and kind of what gives you a radiant glow. Your hair and your skin is made up of collagen and keratin, which is a protein source. That's kind of where if you have like dryness or you're dealing with other areas that you don't feel like you look as radiant, protein's a piece that you might want to be potentially looking at, especially if you're under eating, you're vegetarian, or you're struggling with that. Carbs are going to be your fuel. This is your fuel source for training and recovery. It's also a process of protein synthesis, which people don't really understand. They think of protein as the only source of building muscle mass. When you're under on carbs, there's actually a process that happens with your body where your body will pull energy from muscle mass that you currently have and use that as an energy source. And you want to avoid that by making sure that you're getting enough carbohydrates, especially pre and post workout. So this is like your fueling source and making sure that you're getting enough of it. Carbs are going to be in different formats of simple and complex. Simple is going to be faster digested, whereas complex has more fiber in it, so it slowly digests. And then you have your fat, pretty much two different categories of this. There's trans fats and there's healthy fats. Healthy fats is what you really want to be focusing on. Trans fats is probably the one food that I would tell you to limit and to not be focusing on because these are highly processed, but they are still fats. So I wanted to kind of break that down. Fats are going to help support your hormones, but they're also going to help you maintain satisfaction between meals, and they're going to help you slow down your digestion. So you're going to feel fuller longer by incorporating these into your meals. And your body needs all three of these. There's a different breakdown that you're going to need, and everybody is so different. So it's important that you have the understanding of what you need based on your basal metabolic rate, based on your activity levels, and based on your goals. And then they're broken down to kind of help accommodate with that. So for example, protein is an area that I generally tell people you want to be around 1 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight, and you're from 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight based on your goal. Carbs are something that you want to be around 30 to 40% of your daily calorie intake, and then fats you want to be around 27% of your daily calorie intake, again, based on your goals and based on the things that you're focused on. So the reason why macros work or are a great tool for using to analyze what you're eating, to kind of help you get your results kickstarted if you're struggling with this, and just to kind of give you a focus for your nutrition so you understand a little bit better about what's happening, is first it builds awareness. It really helps you see what you're actually eating versus what you think you're eating. A lot of times when I have my clients start tracking their nutrition, especially if they're using a food scale and they're being accurate and not just guesstimating the portions, they're usually shocked by either the amount of calories they're eating, the amount of protein they're eating or not eating, and the breakdown of their nutrition and where things are coming from. And it's really easy, even though you're eating clean, to have these numbers all over the place and to not be close enough to the goal that you want to achieve, which will give you a lot of insight into why you're maybe not seeing results right now. The next is it gives you a little bit more control, and I would say more freedom when it comes to your nutrition. The coolest thing about macros is you can plan anything you want into them because everything is going to have a nutrition profile and makeup, and you can understand what that is and you can calculate it in a way that you can enjoy your favorite foods and still have balance throughout your routine to stay consistent and see results. So if you're planning out having a cookie or having a sweet treat in every single meal, which by the way, I have every single day, it's something that if you do it right, you're able to actually plan those things in without restricting them. Where I see a lot of people fall short with their nutrition is they're overly restricting and they don't know why they're overly restricting. They've just associated a food as being bad and it causes them to feel overwhelmed or feel like they can't have that food. And then when a craving hits and it's too powerful, they get into this on-off or binging and restricting cycle, which causes them to overindulge and then to restrict for a long period of time. And the cycle just continues, which is going to hurt your progress long term and potentially prevent you from seeing results. So you want to make sure that you have a good strategy around that. And oftentimes macro tracking can give you that freedom and that control so you feel like you have the balance and you still have the foods that you enjoy on a basis that feels consistent and that allows you to have that consistency. So I don't want tracking to necessarily feel restrictive for you or feel obsessive. I want it to be a practice that you can use to help advance your nutrition, to help you advance your understanding, and even help advance your results by giving you clear data and giving you a strategy that you can focus on. Knowing that it's aligned to your bigger goal, because if it's aligned and it gives you the freedom, the control, and the awareness, it's going to feel much more at peace if it feels like something that's still keeping you satisfied and it's not overly restrictive. And this is another piece of the restriction that I see with macro tracking is you go onto a macro calculator and you just kind of plug in some numbers and you get the very baseline number of what you should be eating. And a lot of people will go from eating what they currently are. So let's say you're eating 1900 calories right now and your goal is to lose weight, and you go to that extreme to eating, let's say 1400 calories based on the numbers that you put into the app. That's going to make you feel like you're having an identity crisis because now you're going from 500 calories extra that you're having a day and completely wiping that from your nutrition. Now your body's kind of freaking out. Your cravings are out of control. You're not getting enough food and you don't know how to kind of track those numbers. So you're not necessarily focused on the right things or feeling satisfied. So it's just overwhelming and it's not the right strategy to go from where you're at currently. There's a slow process you should be taking with reversing your numbers down and making sure you're having a good starting point of kind of like where you're at so that you're not just going from point A to point B and there's nothing in between that's going to prevent you from failing. And so then you're just going to kind of be in this cycle consistently of being on, being off, and just feeling like you can't stick to the plan long term. And here are 3 of the top macro mistakes that I often see when you start tracking macros or when you are tracking macros, but you're still not seeing results. The first is under eating on protein and not getting enough protein throughout the day, especially kind of like trying to save this up. If you are not pre-planning your protein in, it's going to be really hard to hit that protein goal, especially if it's a higher goal than you're used to, because protein isn't always the most appetizing meal. Oftentimes, protein is going to be the source or the macronutrient that you're not the most excited about. And think about it this way. This is how I have my clients kind of look at true cravings versus potentially true hunger. And that is, does a grilled piece of chicken sound good to you right now? Or does plain Greek yogurt with nothing on top sound good to you right now? If not, that might be a craving more than it is true hunger. And that's kind of how it works with protein is when you're really hungry, it might be more appetizing, but when you're not hungry and you're dealing with a craving or a habit or a lifestyle, you might find that it's carbs and fats that you're really craving or leaning into. So you have to plan this out because it's not always going to be the most appetizing thing. It's not going to be the easiest choice to necessarily make when it comes to your meals. It does require prep time, it requires cook time, and it requires planning, a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes generally for cooking any source of protein. So if you're waiting till the moment you're hungry, you're probably going to overindulge on carbs or that you wouldn't normally eat if you had foods prepped and ready to go. This really takes some pre-planning to be consistent at it. The other is random low-calorie days followed by uncontrolled weekends. I see this a lot with macro tracking where you're really restrictive Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday, and then you get into a point where Saturday and Sunday come around and your routine's completely different and you have no idea what to be focusing on. You just want to go out with your friends. You want to enjoy meals out because you've been so good the last couple of days. You're not tracking or you're guesstimating and your macronutrients are completely off. There needs to be a good routine for your macros over the weekend, and one good tip that I always tell my clients is start your planning on a Thursday before craziness hits on Friday and kind of plan out some potential meals that you want to have, but also focus on really good meals, maybe the times you're not going out. So for example, if you're going out for dinner Friday and Saturday, maybe enjoy yourself and don't overly stress yourself about tracking, but make sure you're front loading your day with good nutrition and hitting your protein and hitting your micronutrients early on, and making sure you have a good snack before you head out so you don't overindulge when you go out. Don't save up your calories. Make sure you're planning and preparing your calories and your macros. And then the other is too much variety in your nutrition. When it comes to tracking macros, if you don't want to feel like all you're doing is constantly inputting data, it's really important that you have a good, simple strategy when it comes to tracking. Either finding a couple good meals that you really like or a couple good recipes that require some tracking that you could save in your tracking tool and just constantly repeat and change up maybe the serving size here and there, or having really good basics when it comes to your meal rotation, especially for your core meals like your breakfasts, your lunch, and your snacks, and making sure you kind of have these on repeat. If you have a good simple meal strategy and focusing on a protein source like a chicken, a complex carb source like a sweet potato, and a fat source like avocado or even like an oil that you're going to be cooking with, and then your micronutrient source, it's going to be much easier to track those things, especially from ingredient standpoint and using a scale than it is if you're constantly making casseroles and you're constantly making things that require a lot of tracking from you, and if you're always mixing these things up. So if there's no rotation or if there's no simple strategy, it's going to get overwhelming really quickly and you're going to feel like all you do is track your data. So try and make this simple, especially if you're in a deficit or you're really trying to conserve calories. It's really important you have like very basic meals, at least for 80% of them, so that you're not constantly tracking that data, because it will get overwhelming and it'll get to a point where you just feel like this is obsessive and I can't do this anymore. So I'm going to give you a simple formula for tracking your own macros if this is something that you've been looking at doing, and instead of necessarily using a nutrition calculator. But the first thing that I would tell you to do before you did your macros is I would tell you to track your nutrition without changing anything. This is going to give you insight to what's actually happening before you just change up a bunch of stuff. It'll tell you your calories, it'll tell you your protein, and just be honest and real with yourself, because I think it's so important you know that data before you make any changes and know how to get from point A to point B. Otherwise, if you're cutting 500 calories or adding 500 calories, and it's not something you're used to, it's going to be really easy for you to be like, I can't do this. I don't know what to do because it's so out of routine versus making it slow and steady. So that's the first tip I would say. The next is understanding how to break these things out. So if you are trying to lose body fat, you want to make sure your calorie range 10 to 12 times your goal body weight. And if you're trying to maintenance, you want 12 to 14 times your current body weight. If you're trying to build muscle mass, this is where it can get a little bit tricky because it's not necessarily just a number we're looking at here because we're not necessarily looking at body weight. We want to make sure that we're looking at mass itself. So we're probably going to be playing around with more of your protein and adding in calories from your carbohydrates than we would be necessarily just a specific number and increasing your general calorie range. Then if we're looking at protein, you want to be anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. If you are trying to be in a deficit, you'll be a little bit on the lower range. If you're trying to be in a surplus or you're trying to build more muscle mass, you're on a little bit of the higher range. Then for your carbohydrates, we're looking at anywhere from 30 to 40% of your daily calorie goal that we're aiming for. And then for fats, we're looking at anywhere from 27 to 30% of your daily calorie range based on the goal that you have set up. And if you want help with this, I have a free macro calculator that I'll link down below where I'll calculate your macros for you. And that's just an easy way to kind of analyze your data and get numbers sent to you. So I'll put that down below and you can fill that out. And then I'll personally calculate your macros and send those over to you. And these will be tailored towards your specific goal. So how are you going to track without losing your mind and feeling like all you do is tracking? I'm going to give you a few ways to do so and how to kind of simplify the process. Like I said, if you're constantly changing up your meals, if you're constantly making casseroles or constantly making recipes that require you to break every ingredient down, it can be a lot of work. There's a lot of tools available to you now where you can get free information. ChatGPT is a great one, but there's so many different tools that you can use that you can get this information right. You just want to confirm with it that it is correct before you just assume that it's accurate, because that can really throw up your numbers. But there's a lot of ways for you to actually get this information and for you to make sure that you can track it in there. So don't feel like you can't enjoy recipes and you can't try new things. But the simpler the plan, the better, because it's going to allow you to be consistent. It's going to allow you to really copy and paste and to have a routine and a rotation that you can rely on and you know can be consistent. Once you start doing this more consistently, it kind of becomes more of a visual thing and you understand. But if you're trying to actually track your macros and you're changing your numbers each week, this is where it gets really important that you're pre-planning and outlining your week. So the first tip is that you're pre-planning, that you're looking ahead at your week, you're looking at your busy days on your schedule, what days are you're not going to be able to cook, what days you're going to be able to cook, and you're planning out 2 to 3 meals that you're going to rotate for each meal: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. Keep it really simple. Keep it something that you can rotate. You don't have to have 1,000 meals throughout the week, but 2 to 3 really solid core meals that you can make double batches of, triple batches of, you can have leftovers of, and that are going to make your week easy. And that's one of the simplest ways to stay on track without tracking every single day. You outline that inside of your tracking app, and then you update that once a night just to make sure that everything's kind of flowing and that you're on track to hit those numbers. And then you're changing anything out that you potentially changed in your plan, an extra snack, maybe you didn't have a snack, and just really keeping those data up to date. And then the next is you're going to break down your total daily macros into the meals that you're going to have. So let's say you have 1,500 calories. You want to break that up into 3 meals a day and 1 snack. You would have those meals broken down where 2 of the meals are going to be the exact same macros. Your third meal, which is going to be your closest one as your post-workout, is going to be a little higher in protein and a little higher in carbs, and therefore a little higher in calories. But 2 meals are going to be identical. Another meal is going to be your largest meal of the day, and that's going to be closer to your post-workout. And then you're going to have 1 snack, which is going to be the lesser amount of calories, protein, carbs, and fats. Then you're going to have those numbers just kind of mentally in your head. And if you do this in a way where you are ingredient prepping, or if you're focusing on a protein on your plate first, a complex carbohydrate, your micronutrients, your fruits and your vegetables, and then your healthy fats, it's very easy to then measure out your foods, especially if you ingredient prep like ground beef and chicken, your fruits and your vegetables, and then you have sweet potato and rice in the fridge, and then you're all ready to go, and all you have to do is kind of mix and match your meals. It's very easy to pull your food scale out and pull out the amount of grams that you need in each macronutrient, and then have that meal built very quickly, even if you did meal prep or have a ton of meals prepped for the week. So that gives you a really good way to stay consistent by prioritizing your ingredient prep and then also knowing your meal breakdown so you can be consistent of what ranges you need to be at for every single meal. Because like I said, yes, you can put recipes and you can put meals into ChatGPT and get the breakdown of them, but where it gets really complicated is when you're focusing on a bigger meal with a ton of ingredients that might not hit those macronutrient ranges. And it gets easier if you're just breaking up your meal into those 3 categories and making sure that each each one has the ranges that you need based on kind of like the grams and using your food scale and your ingredients that way. You can obviously have meals from casseroles and crock pots and having a ton of ingredients in them. It's just kind of one of those things you have to play with to make sure that if one meal is higher in fats from specific ingredients, that you're playing around with reducing your fats on another meal and increasing your carbs and your protein or whatever it needs to look like so that you can kind of balance those numbers out. So it's really just kind of playing with the numbers and the calculations. And pre-planning is the best way to do that so you can be consistent at it. So let's just say you're starting at counting macros for the first time and this is your first week after you've used the macro calculator and you don't even know what to do or where to start. I'm going to give you a play-by-play and the blueprint of what to be doing for the first week and what to be focusing on so you're not overwhelmed and you can start working with small wins and then build up from there. The first is to hit your protein every single day. I don't want you looking at any other macronutrient other than your protein. And I want you to just find ways that you can break that up throughout your day. Take that number, divide it by 3 or 4, however many meals that you're going to have, and know what your bare minimum number has to be for your meals so that you can hit that goal. That's going to be giving you something to kind of look for at every single meal. It's going to help it be more digestible so that you feel like you can actually hit that goal and not get to the end of the day, realize you have 70 grams of protein, you have no idea how you're going to hit it, and it just sounds absolutely horrible, whatever you can incorporate to hit that goal. That's the first goal you're going to be focusing on is your protein goal, making sure you can hit that number. The next is you're going to start tracking in an app. I want you to actually get a food scale and I want you to measure your protein out and start tracking it so that you can get used to the habit and you can get used to the routine. If you want to, you can definitely track your carbs and your fats and start tracking everything. But really what we want to make sure we're doing is hitting that protein goal. So if your carbs and your fats are off and you're within the calorie range and you're within your protein goal, great. But if they're off and they're not perfect, that's okay. We're not obsessing over that right now. What I really want you just focusing on is that protein and being consistent and getting used to the action of hitting that goal and used to the tracking activity. The next is you're going to keep your meals really simple and repetitive. Find meals you enjoy and find ways that you can spice them up with toppings, sauces, and maybe a little bit of creativity, but don't go crazy with meals and just searching on Pinterest for macro-friendly recipes. Instead, try to find some staple meals that you can have for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner that are going to allow you to be consistent. Not always cooking, not always tracking, because that's where it gets really overwhelming. Find simple staples and ways to break up your meals in protein, complex carbohydrates, fats, and your micronutrients and fiber. And then the next is that I want you to cut your calories when you mess up. What I really want you to be focusing on is understanding how that happened and trying to analyze the data. What is it that you did in your meals that might potentially have sent you overboard? What could you have done better? Did you have protein in your meals? Did you have micronutrients in your meal? Or did it make up to a lot of carbs and fats and had less protein than you thought? And how can you make that better and improve upon that for the next day? Because you need to understand that so you can make those changes, not just say, well, hopefully I'll get better tomorrow. Actually understand the data and understand what you did so that you can kind of make those changes and those tweaks so that you can get a little bit better at tracking and that you can get better about pre-planning, which is going to bring us to our last point, which is pre-plan your nutrition. Do not post-track every single meal unless you're just starting out without changing anything and just trying to get those core numbers. But if you're trying to hit a macronutrient goal, you want to pre-plan these numbers into your app so you have a visualization of how you're going to hit those numbers and you have it pre-planned to actually hit those numbers. If you are honestly only post-tracking or guesstimating, it's going to be almost impossible for you to hit those numbers because now you have no control over it. But when you pre-plan and you outline, you actually have control over the process. You have control over what you're going to be eating and you can play with it before you're hungry. If you're waiting until the point you're hungry or you're waiting until after the meal, now you have no control and you can't change anything. Or you likely are going to have a hard time changing something because you're going to get stressed out if you're just now getting to the point of eating your meal and you're starving and you have to figure out how to hit your macros. So pre-plan this. Give yourself a decision that's already been made and that you can just follow the plan. And that's going to keep you consistent much longer because now you have the process kind of already done and the visualization done and it's kind of done for your future self. So if I did anything with this episode today, I hope that I helped kind of change your mindset around macronutrients and giving it to you as more of a tool and something that you can build awareness around your nutrition versus something that's going to keep you restrictive and feeling obsessive over your nutrition. I do not believe that macros are something that you should be doing forever. I do not believe that you are going to have to do them forever. I, for example, have done macros before in the past, and it's a tool that I utilize when I really want to reach a goal, but I don't track macros a majority of the time because I've gotten to a place where I'm just keeping maintenance. And that's the goal that I have for you when it comes to tracking macros is that you're utilizing it to build awareness and to make sure that your nutrition is aligned so that you can reach that goal. And then once you reach that goal, being able to step back and get back into a lifestyle place with your food and your nutrition because you built that lifestyle around good visualization as well, and you kind of know how to build out a meal and understand your hunger cues. So there's a bigger reason behind macro tracking, and I hope that you see that with the tool and being able to use it yourself to kind of implement in your nutrition to reach your goals. And like I said, I have the macro calculator down below. It's completely free. I'll calculate your macros for you, and then I'll send them your way so you have a starting point. And if you'd like, we can always go over them and kind of chat through your goals together to make sure that they're aligned and that you're focusing on the right things. And then lastly, a little announcement. Fitness is now live if you're listening to the podcast as this comes out in November. This is a 4-week challenge running on December 1st through the end of December. And this is really exciting because December 1st falls on a Monday. So it's the perfect time to kind of like close out your year with a bang. But this challenge is designed to help you have structure through the holiday season. You get a 4-week workout plan, you get a high protein meal planner, and you get access to a group community to keep you on track. That's going to be the basic aspect of this program. And then there's a VIP version this year, which is going to give you a ton of freebies, a ton of bonuses that add up to over like $400 worth of value in the bonuses. And I'm also giving away cash prizes. So for the basic one, you can get a cash prize of $100 for the best transformation. And then the first place best transformation prize for the VIP program is $200 cash prize. So I'm very excited because I want to give back to you guys this season, and I want to make sure that this challenge is affordable. Generally, these challenges run anywhere from like $150 to $200 depending on when you sign up, but I wanted to make this affordable for everybody that wants to join and everybody who wants to be able to utilize this during the holiday season to kickstart into January and just have that consistency. The basic runs around $50 depending on when you sign up for the pre-sale, and then the VIP runs anywhere from $75 from when you sign up for the pre-sale. So there is a ton of value and there is a ton of resources in there. I'm not changing the program from what I've done in the previous challenges. I'm truly just going to be discounting it so that you guys can sign up and that as many people who want to join this year can be a part of it. So check that out. There is a link down below that kind of gives you a breakdown of the different challenges. And I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and I will talk to you next week in the next episode.